Oh, I'm on. Okay, sorry. Professional show business. Good evening and welcome to the Comics Experience Graphic Novel of the Month Club for the month of June 2023. We've got a fantastic book this month, a beautiful, shall I say, ethereal, kind of a tone poem. It's smart, and I really, really liked Adherent. And we're very happy to be joined by Chris Kim, who's right there. Boom. Hello, Chris.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here, man. I really, really enjoyed this book. Yeah, it's kind of magical. So
Oh,
good job.
well, it's good to hear after all those years of working on it.
Yeah. Oh, well, I'd love to talk about that, but let's go with the first question. The first question is the same in every show, and it's why comics? What is it about the meaning of comics that speaks to you, that is the thing that you want to do, that you want to express yourself? Because as you just said, it takes quite a long time to make comics. What is it for you?
Right. Yeah, it's a good question. It should be obvious, I guess, what the answer is, but it's kind of hard to articulate. I guess it's obviously I like storytelling, and I like movies, books, etc. But I feel like the idea of having a whole story told in drawings has always seemed really kind of like almost luxurious, like to have page after page of drawings. So it's that feeling like when I see a comic that I really like, and then I just see like wall to wall drawings, and like all the subtleties of the storytelling are told through expression and you know gesture and the backgrounds. It's kind of amazing, I think. So I guess the excitement I get when I read comics is what drew me to it, obviously.
Yeah. What would you say is the first comic that really stuck with you, that made you feel that as a reader?
Maybe when I was like really young, my mom got me some like Tintin comics,
Nice.
and in a way they stuck with me because they're kind of pretty frightening in some points.
Yeah.
So like the sudden uh, imagery that I saw as I was flipping through it, it was kind of like almost nightmarish. I don't know if you've read Tintin, but like some of it's really,
Yeah,
really.
no, I mean, I've read all of Tintin. I'm trying to think, like, what part is nightmarish. I always think of it as just as like propulsive action storytelling.
There's one, the crab with the golden claws, where Captain
Mm-hmm.
Haddock is like delirious, and he thinks Tintin's a champagne bottle, I think, and he's trying to corkscrew his head out. That's like imprinted in my mind forever.
Interesting. I always read that as like he's supposed to be the amusing drunk there, as opposed to like that's menacing.
Yeah, but I think I was like 6.
Right.
So I saw that and I'm like, oh my god, why is he a bottle? And what's that curly sword he's using? But yeah, but I feel like that's one of the earlier memories I have, honestly. Just those old battered, Tintins.
Yeah. That's that's a great thing to have as sort of a foundational work. Hergé is such an immaculate cartoonist. Have you always wanted to be a cartoonist?
It was more like a kind of inkling in the back of my mind I didn't have like this huge passion because I read comics, but I didn't like have a huge, I didn't read a huge amount growing up. But it always seemed like something that I wanted to do that maybe I'd get to eventually. But yeah, it wasn't like a passion actually, at least initially, until I started doing it, and then I realized like, oh, all these things that are possible that I could do.
Oh, I love
but
it.
That was like when I was in my 20s.
Yeah. When you went to art school, I saw on the bio page. Did you go to study comics, or were you studying illustration in general, or what was the path at that point?
Yeah, so I went technically for like fine art and drawing.
Yeah.
And then after the first year, I decided it wasn't for me. So then I switched over to illustration and did the rest of my 3 years in just the illustration program.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, when I came out of OCAD, I was expecting to be an illustrator, and like that's definitely influenced how I draw for sure. Like the kind
Yeah.
of conceptual images they try to train you to draw, and like the very clean style that sort of you can read it immediately.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that seeped into how I draw comics, just how I draw in general.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't. There were some. I took like one comic, no, maybe two comic classes during my years at OCAD, and there were quite a few cartoonists who came out of that year, even though it was illustration. So, I think there's just something like very transferable from illustration to comics.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Sure. Though I think, I mean, broadly, I would think that illustrations about finding one single image, whereas comics is about finding, well, two single images, but they have to juxtapose with each other. So
Mhm.
it seems slightly different to me, like
Yeah.
I think, that, for example, the cover of a novel isn't necessarily going to tell you a story in the same way that a piece of comics can. That's
Mhm.
probably an awful example, actually.
No, no, no. You're right. It is. I mean, it's both similar. It's like adjacent but very different. You're right.
Yeah.
Um, like in the kind of comics I make, I kind of draw stuff out in the sense that I draw actions out. So, I show someone walking up the stairs, I show them looking at a building, I show them
Yeah.
entering the building. So you don't get to do that in a single image, obviously. And maybe that's why I like illustration, because you can kind of, or sorry, why I like comics, because you can take your time and you can focus on the little movements and the little kind of expressions that people have.
Mm-hmm.
But then when I don't do like full splash pages, but there's some images that are very prominent in comics, like it's a big, I guess, a reveal or an important moment. And I think there, the illustration principles kind of come in,
Mm-hmm. 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 Mm-hmm.
because suddenly you're trying to say a lot in one image instead of stretching it out or decompressing it, right,
Yeah.
over panels or pages.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's sort of like a spectrum. I think like on one end you can get pretty close to illustration in comics, and then on the other hand you can spend 5 pages of someone walking through a forest or something,
Right. Which you do.
which I literally, yeah, which I did for a whole book almost. Go figure.
Oh man. This is your third book.
Mhm.
So let me ask you, how did your first book come along?
Oh yeah. So my first book, that was a Herman by Trade, and then
Yeah.
I published it with Self-Made Hero, who are in the UK. So that book, I was just working a part-time job, and then I just wanted to make a comic because I thought, I'm getting into my like mid to late 20s. I might as well try this out. And then I kind of did it just to see if I could do it.
Yeah.
And it ended up being like a little over 100 pages. So once I was finished the whole thing, I just sent like a PDF of this 110-page book to a couple different publishers that
Uh-huh.
had open submissions. And Self-Made Hero, they said like, yeah, we'll do it. And I was
Just that
shocked.
easy, huh?
It was that easy. Well, I think it's kind of inadvisable to finish a whole comic and then
Sure.
pitch it.
100, especially to do 100 pages of work without knowing who's going to buy it or if someone's going to buy it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little, no one should do that, but I did it. And
Oh
it did
man.
work. So hey, I don't know. If you're weird enough to do that, then sure. But I think it kind of stood out because of that, because they got this complete book. They could see, beginning to end, and in a way, maybe that made me stand out.
Yeah.
But that's literally what I did.
Well, I don't know that I can think in any interview that I've done with anyone that someone has broken in that particular fashion. So many times you hear like, yeah, no, I went to conventions for like years trying to get people to interested in my art.
I did
Yeah,
that
no,
too.
I drew 100 pages, sent it in. They said, sure, I'll publish that. Love it. I
I
love it. That's
I went
fantastic.
to a convention and then I tried to do like a portfolio review and it was so crushing. Like
Yeah,
it was so brutal that I never tried again.
yeah.
So maybe that's why I just hunkered down. I'm like, I don't want to. I'm just going to do what I'm going to do, and I'll see if
So
anyone wants it.
did you literally go in as 100-page comic as your first thing, or had you done mini comics or smaller things before then?
I done shorter comics, but I just posted them online. Like I didn't do zines or anything.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, it was like 10-page, 5 to 10 page comics, and I just
Right.
did maybe a dozen of those.
Yeah.
Um, but nothing published before that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Cool. And your second book was also a self-made hero, which I assume means the first one did well for them. They wanted to see more.
Maybe. Yeah. They were interested in seeing another one. Yeah, and the second one was Strays, and then that came out. I mean, that was like it was supposed to be released earlier, and then COVID happened, and
Yeah.
it was a whole big mess. Like a lot of comics around that time, like a lot of everything, it kind of got buried. I feel like because everything was so uncertain.
Yeah.
Who's buying comics when you don't know what the next year is going to be like.
Right. Right.
But yeah, no, Self-Made Hero is great, but it's nice to be with Conundrum because they're Canadian.
Sure.
So yeah,
So,
that's kind of
how did you get hooked up with them?
It was Hartley Lynn. He did Young Francis. And, yeah, he's a friend, and he
was Young Francis was our graphic novel club pick.
Yeah, no, I actually watched that one. Yeah,
Okay.
like a couple of years back. Yeah, he's great. So he knows Andy from Conundrum, and he just mentioned my name to Andy. So I kind of took that as an in, like, oh, Andy, you've heard my name before, you've seen my work. I'm working on this new graphic novel, and I got a grant from it, like a government grant to work on it. So I think it all just it all worked out, and Andy seemed to think it was worth pursuing. So yeah, it was also just that easy, I guess.
Yeah, those grants are something that American artists don't have any experience with in any way, shape, or form. Well, not in any way, shape, or form, but very, very few people get any kind of grants in the States. But it seems like that's a pretty major part of the Canadian comic scene. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, from my experience, like we have pretty good arts funding in general.
Yeah.
Like the comics grants here are usually under literary, arts. So we're competing against like books and poetry and all that.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's like different levels of funding. Like there's federal, provincial, municipal levels of funding, so you can apply to all three.
Interesting.
And they also potentially fund like travel for book tours, and the publishers themselves, they like provide funding for them.
Yeah.
So we're very lucky. We're like,
yeah,
you're right. I think when I talk to Americans about it, like American cartoonists, it seems like some weird, like hippie dream that we have this. And it is.
It's
amazing.
communism, I tell you, communism.
Yeah, it's a socialist nonsense over here.
Yeah.
But yeah,
no, I mean, if it lets people make work without having to sweat surviving, that's a pretty major and important thing.
Yeah. I mean, if you have the time to dedicate to it, it changes, I think, the whole quality of the work.
Yeah.
Like, because I made the first 2 books, at least partly while I was working other jobs. And you need, to be able to concentrate on a single book for like a whole year or more. I think it shows in the actual work.
Yeah.
Like you kind of get that, you hone in on it, right? And you have the sense of, it's not fragmented, it's like a single line of effort. It's hard to express.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's very important, I think. Like it really contributes to it.
So you were able to not have a straight job then?
Yeah, while working on Adherent.
Nice. Very nice.
It was during COVID too, so like once everything shut down,
okay, yeah,
it kind of I'm not going to say worked out, but the timing,
Right.
you know, synced up for that. I'm like, okay,
Did you did you get the grant? You got the grant before COVID, or?
Yeah,
Okay.
I got it. I got it before COVID, and then in like 5 months after I got the grant, things started shutting down.
Yeah.
So it's like, all right,
Yeah.
well, let's work on this.
Now you literally have no other choice but to draw this. Yeah.
Yeah, I really didn't.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. And just out of curiosity, I mean, pardon me if this is too forward of question, but does it are these government grants? Do they give you enough to like actually make a living and pay your rent and pay your food and all of that, or is it a partial?
In my case, it did. Yeah, like
Yeah.
it ranges from a couple thousand, like the low end could be, I don't know, like 7,000
Yeah.
up to 24K potentially.
Right.
So, it depends on where you live. Toronto's freaking expensive,
Yeah.
but I live in a bachelor. So, yeah, it lasted me more than a year.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Very nice. That's fantastic, man.
Mhm.
I wish we had art funding like that. Honestly, I know so many cartoonists who are, they're all stressed out about money, and
Right.
it's got to be nice to have that kind of backstop. Not that every single person is getting the government money, but it's nice for the people who do. I think that's great.
Mhm.
And when it produces a piece of work that is, as clearly as, I mean, this feels like you were sitting down and working on it, and all the way through and every day and yada yada
Yeah,
yada. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
yeah. So where did the germ of the idea for Adherent come?
Mhm. It was sort of like a combination of a bunch of ideas I had just sort of floated together, and then it kind of ended up working, which is how I tend to write. I just jot down any stupid idea I have on this big
Yeah,
list on my computer, and then when they seem to complement each other, it starts to form a story. But one of the first ideas I had was like, you know, these big works of usually like religious works where we don't know who to attribute the authorship to, or even just stuff like Shakespeare, right? Like we don't
sure.
exactly know who he was, and then if you could actually meet the person behind these revered, texts, would that work out? Would you want to? Especially because nowadays people are, you know, looking at authors or just artists in general and being like, you're not the person I want you to be, because
Mm,
a lot of the time you're unsavory, to put it mildly, you know, or your personal life contradicts the values you espouse in
sure,
your work, right?
sure,
That
sure.
happens a lot. So I think that was kind of on my mind. And then there was also this movie I watched called Vagabond, which is about a young woman who just decides to leave home and just wander through France, basically.
Yeah,
And that image just kind of stuck. So I think it's a pretty direct influence on M in Adherent. Just this kind of wandering young woman who is seems to be searching for something, but it's a little obscure both to the audience and to herself what it is, and she's kind of trying to figure it out as she goes.
yeah, yeah. And there's like, when did you add the I mean, I guess post-apocalyptic elements is what I would call them, even though it's not really clear what happens, or if it's an apocalypse, it's certainly a very gentle one, you know?
It is, yeah, yeah. Funnily enough, I didn't realize it was post-apocalyptic until I was pretty far into writing it, which
Okay.
is kind of dumb on my part because it shows like a lack of self-awareness. But I had the idea of the small like communes, villages, and then it builds up to towns, bigger towns, and then it culminates in a city.
Yeah.
And the city that I wanted it to end with, I didn't have like a totally firm idea of what it would be like when I started writing the story. And I think what happened is COVID happened, and then I did
Interesting.
end
Yeah.
up rewriting a big chunk of the climax, I guess.
Yeah.
So, and that includes when M comes up to the city and it's in ruins.
Yeah.
So, it was a dark time
Yeah.
during COVID, and I think that transferred into the imagery I started using in the comic.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so then did you go back to the beginning of the story and change elements of it?
Not really, actually, because I had that idea of the items being scattered everywhere,
Mm-hmm.
and at first I thought it would just be like they could come from a city uh, that's still populated, or maybe from a partially, abandoned city.
Yeah.
So that was a little up in the air. But yeah, because of that, I didn't really have to rewrite much of the initial parts of the story.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, it was only until like I got to the climax where I felt like, okay, this has to be a pretty uh, destroyed, like in ruins kind of
Yeah.
landscape that she comes
Yeah.
to. Yeah.
Yeah. But even the early buildings, I mean, it all looks pretty rough, right? And
Mhm.
in the village, goes to the writer's house and like the village elder or whatever wants to tear the building apart, right? So
Mhm.
that would seem like you knew at that point that there was something going on, or was that one of the bits that got rewritten? I'm just trying to see where you were at with this.
Yeah, for sure. It is hard to describe, but I would say like the idea I had was M in her small village.
Mm-hmm.
It's a small, you know, kind of tight community,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't have a lot of resources. And what village they do have is pretty kind of ramshackle,
Yeah.
makeshift. And the idea was as she goes through each town, as she searches for the writer, they get larger, they get more elaborate. These towns
Sure.
do, I mean.
Yeah.
And then when she gets to the city, like that's the most advanced, kind of overwhelming location she's been to yet. And so I wanted her to kind of in like this dreamlike way go through progressions of states of society, basically,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
go from a very rudimentary one,
Mm-hmm.
which really starts with the writer's shack. Like I thought that was the beginning point, and then it
Yeah.
goes all the way up to the city.
Yeah.
So in that way, I wanted it to start in this very rough looking rudimentary village.
Yeah. That makes sense.
And then, yeah, I had the idea that, okay, maybe the culmination should be this big, pristine city on a hill. But then it ended up being like, okay, you get to the big city, but it's actually kind of a wasteland, which, again, I think it was COVID. I'm like, all right, we got to this great point, this big city that, that everyone wants to go to. And then look how easily it crumbles and look how
Yeah.
easily it falls apart.
Yeah. All I'm saying is that I took as a reader, I got that the world was destroyed long before then.
Hmm.
Just from the quiet nature of it, I guess, of the abandoned nature of it.
Right. No, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
I think it's because like everything I write, it's not super it sort of lives in a dreamy kind of in between state,
Yeah. Yeah.
kind of like a fable or something.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So I guess I kind of have a disregard for like, oh, how would a big city suddenly appear in this landscape that's mostly abandoned
Sure.
and ruined? I'm
Sure.
just like, it'll work out.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and it did. It very much did. Did you well, so okay, so you said that you came to this essentially a couple of months into the book, right? Of you making the book. Were you drawing at that point, or were you still just writing?
No, I was drawing. I was like, yeah, just starting drawing, maybe the
Okay.
first dozen pages or so.
Okay. Okay.
You know.
Okay. And so then what was the pitch for the book like? Since it clearly changed from like your environment around you and COVID around you, like,
Mhm.
or I mean, I don't know. It seems tricky to get people to go for that, if you know what I mean.
Hmm. Yeah, it is. Well, I think Andy has experience with, Conundrum publishes like a really eccentric kind
Sure.
of catalog. So I think
Hence the
he's
name.
used to people, to cartoonists, kind of either going off the deep end or being relatively conservative with how they
Right.
work.
Right.
He's just a flexible,
Right.
understanding guy.
Right.
So I
And
just didn't have any problems.
the grants, no string is attached, I'm assuming, as long as you complete the work. They don't really care what the work ends up being. Is that right?
More or less, yeah, unless it's horrific.
Like you don't have an art police going, you know what, kid, this comic ain't good enough.
No, not yet.
Yeah. Okay.
Nothing happened. No. That's a good question. I wonder if anyone has interesting stories about that. But
Yeah. Well, I
no,
can't
other than
imagine
that,
how, right? Like if the government's giving you money to create art, the government should really be quiet about what that art is. I think. If you live in a society that values the funding of art, art should be left alone. I think. I don't know.
I would agree. Yeah. They make you write like a super detailed proposal at the start to
Yeah.
get out all your intentions and everything. So I think that's how they kind of manage what's being funded. You're like, all right, you have, interesting artistic intentions. Go forth. We'll leave you alone.
But you found a truth about the story that wasn't there in your initial intentions, I guess, is the point that I'm trying to get at. And I think that's cool that it still moved forward, and I think that's great. I don't know, because you were approved at that point. They're not coming back and checking up on you. So
yeah, true. Although I didn't give them like a full script, I just told them like the outline. But
yeah,
I don't know. Maybe they'll watch this and they'll be like, "Wait a minute,
we better get that money back." No, I don't think so. Because it's a beautiful book, so it all works out in the end. That's what I'm saying. So let's see. So you obviously you scripted ahead of time. What do your scripts look like? Are they full, or are you writing for yourself so that you don't need to describe things to that detail? If that makes sense. Like, could someone else draw the comic that was in your script, if you know what I mean?
Oh, probably not. It's just a Word document. Like, I don't thumbnail it. And like, I describe it in words, in prose, enough that I know, like, I captured the idea that I had as I was writing the script. But they're pretty vague. Like, it's a pretty messy kind of script. It's not tight like a screenplay or something.
Yeah.
So I don't think anyone reading it would be able to make heads or tails of a lot of it.
Yeah. Yeah. There are long periods of silence in the book. I mean, when I say long, like 5 or 6 pages, maybe, actually, maybe there's 10 or 12 actually when I look at it. But how much are you breaking that down in the script, and how much of it is, this page she's walking through the forest finding objects. This page she's found, she's reading the book and looking at the fauna, if it compares to the fauna. Like, how much detail are you going into for a script, if that makes sense?
Yeah. I'm not breaking it down too rigorously. I'm basically, like, if I have in my head a really vivid image, I'll describe that in text, like in a pretty detailed way.
Yeah.
But I'm also happy to be like, all right, if she's going to walk through a forest and then get to a village, I can leave a lot of that up to the actual drawing and just put she walks through a forest.
Right.
Because I found, like, I trip myself up if I set myself too rigid of a script.
Sure.
And I've done it so many times, like, where I realized, wait a minute, I'm blocking myself in, it doesn't feel natural.
Yeah.
So I've kind of learned to ease up and to not, to give myself a lot of leeway, basically, when I write it out.
Yeah. Did you thumbnailed the whole book ahead of time, I'm assuming? No. Interesting.
Yeah, I don't really, I didn't really think about my own process when I started doing comics. I just sort of intuitively started drawing how I wanted to.
Sure.
So I just ended up like maybe thumbnailing ahead for 5 pages,
Interesting.
and then I'll
Okay.
do that stretch. And
Uh-huh.
then sometimes I just thumbnail it onto the page, or I
Okay.
guess it's not a thumbnail, I just rough it onto the page itself.
Right. Right.
It's really like what I think a lot of it is just what helps me keep drawing. Because if I thumbnail the whole thing and then I look at all the thumbnails, I'm like, oh my God, I have to draw 220 pages of this.
Yeah.
It's more, I think, interesting, more organic again if I don't, you know, plan out every single step ahead of time.
Sure.
You know?
Sure. One of the interviews we did was Dan Clowes. It was for Patience, and I want to say that book's probably 300 pages, something like that. It's a big old thick one. And he told me that he thumbnails the whole entire thing out, then he pencils it all out from page one to page end. Then he does the lettering from page one to page end. Then he does the inking from page one to page end. And like the rigorousness of the steps that he went through, I thought as I was talking to him about it, how can you keep yourself interested in the work, right? If you're literally going through and starting at page one and then doing page two and then doing page three of one step, and then you're starting again and doing that again. I always found that a fascinating process. And it
Yeah.
sounds like yours is almost the opposite, that you're just doing kind of small chunks and you're just making the story work as a more spontaneous thing, even though you have a script. Does that sound
Yeah,
right?
it does. I mean, I remember reading Klaus talking about his process, and then when I realized how meticulous he is, he kind of
Yeah.
both blew my mind and made me like cringe a bit. Like, oh, how do you, how can you do that? Like, just as a cartoonist, thinking doing that myself was so painful.
Yeah.
But he gets the results, obviously, so he's doing it right for him. But
Yeah.
what helped me actually, I remember reading Chris Ware saying he does it like page by page. He doesn't have a script beforehand.
Right.
And he's like, when you look at it at a finished page, it's the most, meticulous looking thing you could think of.
Yep.
And yet somehow he
Yep.
just improvises.
Yep.
So that kind of gave me some leeway, I feel like, to go like, all right, I have to figure out what works,
Yeah.
like what'll make me make the best work that I could.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, to me, that's the beautiful part about comics, is that if you ask 20 cartoonists how they make them, you will get 20 different answers. And every single one of those answers is right. Not one of them is wrong. And not just from these mechanical things we're talking about, but also about craft and tools and all of those things. And there are no rules. The only rules is that you have to make good comics,
Exactly.
and I like that. I like that because that doesn't seem to be as true in prose and film and music. It doesn't seem that way to me. So,
Do you, with cartoonists, have you seen a trend, like if they tend to write it out versus improvising? Do you have a
no, I
sense?
would say it's all over the map. I mean, I would say overall, most people are writing at least a rudimentary script because in American, you have to get someone to authorize your work before they're going to pay for it, right? And so you actually have to prove to them that you've got what it takes. Now, certainly cartoonists who are further along in their career, don't have to do as much of that showing ahead of time. But, I talk to a lot of young cartoonists who, it's like their first book in a lot of cases too. And almost all of them have to really work hard,
Yeah.
to get it all written out. And because, I think for a lot of them too, they're figuring out how to do long form work. In many cases, I've talked to people who are, who that book is their first book, and they had done a 20-page story once, but that was it. And now they're doing a 200-page graphic novel. So if you don't write it out, it's easy to get lost.
Yeah.
And so that's what I would ask you is how do you avoid getting lost in some of the more ethereal details of the story Like, in other words, how do you know that those 10 pages walking through the forest are like, it's time to stop, right? Like they've actually got to arrive at the destination. Does that make
Right.
sense?
Yeah, it does. Um, I actually do a lot of redrawing, and sometimes I throw pages out.
Mm,
So that's the, I guess, consequence of my willy-nilly style, which is
sure,
that I screw up along the way, and then
sure.
a decent drawing, I'll have to just get rid of it.
Yeah,
Um, so it is a lot of editing sometimes to get the pacing right.
yeah,
Um, and I just reread the past few pages over and over to get the rhythm. Like rhythm is really important to
yeah,
me
yeah, yeah.
in making comics. So I think I just pay a lot of attention, or I try to, as I write and draw. So, I mean, I don't have a technical answer, I guess, but I
Yeah.
just
No, no,
try to
no.
really hone in on
I mean, I don't know that
what
there
feels
are
right.
technical answers to a question like that. Uh, you know, so when you say you're doing a lot of redrawing, you're a lot of throwing out pages, I'm assuming you're talking about still in the thumbnail
No,
portion, though.
no,
Really? Oh, in the
yeah,
rendered portion. Oh,
yeah,
interesting.
like finished drawings. Yeah, it's
Wow.
painful.
Wow. How often does that happen?
Ooh, I wonder, like an adherent, there was like a decent amount. Probably the least I've ever done because I've thrown out like 30, 40 pages before in my past
Uh-huh.
comics.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, this one maybe, I don't know, 15 or something. I've like chopped and then I redrew a ton of panels,
Right.
which I consider a bit different. At least you can salvage some of it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But yeah, a lot, like more than I should
Interesting.
probably. Yeah.
Interesting. 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 But you clearly you think that it gives you a better product at the end of the day.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I think it does. And I think, kind of again, I think it's more like me being engaged.
Sure.
Like, even if I know it's painful to get rid of a finished image or a panel or a whole page later
Yeah.
on, just the act of like drawing like what I think is going to be a finished page at each step. I don't know, it's just exciting to me, right? It's like it if I have to think this page has to be perfect and I know it has to be perfect, otherwise I'm not drawing it. That's kind of stifling in my mind.
Sure.
So yeah,
Sure.
it's a trade-off.
Yeah.
But I guess it's worth it to me.
Yeah, yeah. For what it's worth, you're not the wildest one I've heard. The wildest one was I interviewed a Nellie Furmark. She did a book called Walk Me to the Corner, which is a beautiful. I love that book. But she told me that her process is that she starts every page by coloring it first. That's what she does first, is she colors it.
Mhm.
Because she's using watercolor, right? And then she decides what the story and what the panels are going to be after she has the colors all laid down. And I'm like, yeah, don't you throw away a lot of stuff then because you were like, oh, it didn't work out? Like, oh, she's like, all the time, like 20% of it probably gets thrown out. I'm like, that,
Yeah, that's like as backwards as it could be.
yeah, but I love it. I mean, because again, she found something that worked for her, and she found something that, you know, despite what I would think is a handicap, right? Doing it that way, she made a wonderful, beautiful, poignant book that was
Mhm.
full of heart and story. So
Yeah,
I think it's cool.
I think you know Van Sciver.
It-
He has a YouTube channel. I remember him showing like, yeah, I cut these because the pacing was bad. He cut like
yeah,
20 pages from a book,
yeah,
and he just didn't care at all.
yeah,
Like to him, it's all about the pacing of the story, and
yeah,
I respect that for sure. When people are able to do that casually, because when I do
yeah.
it, I'm like, I always go, oh God, do I really want to throw away all this work? But
Right.
it's worth it. Yeah.
Yeah. So how long does it take you to pencil a page then?
Um, at best, I can do it in like half a day.
Okay.
But some pages, like in Adherent, there's a page with a spiral staircase,
Uh-huh.
and that took me forever because I don't know why I did that. Why
Yeah.
would I draw a spiral staircase? But I did, and that sometimes it can take me days to pencil a page. It's very inconsistent. Like
Yeah.
I'm very
Well,
start to
yeah,
stop.
because I mean these pages have a lot of detail.
Mhm.
and a lot of hatching and a lot of work in them, a lot of texture. Like, so what would you say, like, is your average penciling
Maybe
rate?
2 days from
Okay.
like pencil to
Okay.
inking it. Yeah.
To full ink. Yeah. Does that include the coloring step?
No, I do that in like big batches.
Okay.
I scan, 20 pages and do the grayscale.
Yeah.
But that's
Yeah.
really fast. Like I can finish that pretty quick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. How about the inking? Not the inking. Sorry, the lettering.
Mhm.
When are you lettering? Are you lettering before the ink goes down or after?
So what I started doing was penciling in the lettering, and then I will like ink it in Photoshop. So the
I see.
lettering
Okay.
is actually done in Photoshop, but I still do it by hand, you know,
Okay.
just because I had to keep changing the dialogue because I was like fine tuning everything as
Yeah.
little dialogue as there is.
Yeah.
So I couldn't keep whiting it out and
Yeah.
redrawing it. So yeah,
So you're hand lettering digitally. Is that
yeah, exactly.
interesting? Again, that's one I've never heard from someone before. Because usually when people do it digitally, they're using a font that's based on their handwriting, but that's different than hand lettering it
Mhm.
digitally.
It is. I thought about doing that, yeah, custom font thing
Mhm.
where you can like put in 5 A's and 5B's and it'll vary up the characters,
Yeah. Yeah.
So maybe I will because it's extremely inefficient and kind of nuts for me to do this. Um, I just like lettering, I think. I like the feeling of lettering, even if it's digital.
Yeah. No, and I mean I like your handwriting, and your lettering is very, very, very readable. So that's
That's
always the
good to know.
secret. Um yeah, and it, I suppose it makes it easier when you've got, like, when we're reading a book over M's shoulder, and we can still see the text. You're going in there and doing that all manually then.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's all in a sloppy, not cursive, but it's like in
Yeah.
a different, more natural kind of style.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's actually inked in, physical ink, the
Right.
pages in the writer's notebooks because I wanted it to feel more, you
Interesting.
know,
Okay.
gritty,
Okay.
grounded. Yeah,
So that's in the original art then.
that's in the original art. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. So I mean, just so I understand, just going through the steps,
Mhm.
you're penciling and inking physically, but you're leaving space for the lettering that you've already penciled in, so you know how much space it takes.
Yep.
But when you're scanning it in, it's not there other than like a pencil outline or whatever. Is that
Exactly.
sound right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
exactly what I do. Yeah.
Okay. And then you scan that in, and then you lay the washes and the colors down on top of that.
Hmm. That's right.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you just send a digital file. You're not re-outputting it. Then you're
No.
just sending a digital file to the publisher. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's just like a PSD or a PDF
Uh-huh.
document that I'm
Uh-huh.
sending. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
God. Yeah. Again, I know people who do the pencils digitally, but then they print them out to ink them in blue line, right? Like, so it's so
Oh,
cool how
yeah.
everybody uses the tools in a different way. I find that amazing. I really do.
Well, I could to make it even more complicated. I technically added some gray tones with physical like ink wash.
Oh, okay.
So there are little spots in there that are actually hand done gray tones.
Mm-hmm.
It's mostly on the people because I thought those were a little more subtle and I wanted to get them
Sure.
down just right. So it's like a big mishmash of analog and digital.
Yeah.
Even I
Neat.
can't keep track really.
I love it. I
Yeah.
think that's great. I think that's great. I want to ask something about sort of thematic part of the story, and I'm not quite sure how to phrase it because I'm not smart enough. there's a quote on, is it in the back text or something, where it talks about, I was going to say it talks about social media, but it doesn't. It's our increasingly disconnected world. And of course, my brain immediately fills in, well, that's social media that we're talking about. Is so I guess the question that I want to ask is, do the metaphors of the story, what's your intention with them? Maybe that's the way to ask the question. I probably bobbled that one. I'm sorry.
That's okay. But could I ask like which metaphors or like which scene maybe were you thinking
Oh,
of?
I don't know. I mean, like there was a section in there where, and I think I read this like 2 weeks ago, so I can't remember exactly which it was. I think it was before she meets the author. She was talking to someone else about making work, and I thought like you should be making work because you want to make work, not be, actually I guess it was the author section. And I thought you were talking about making comics at that point.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I know which section you're talking about, because it does kind of end up being about like what's your intent in making a work. If you're just sort of, are you duplicating what's around you, or are you trying to, I guess, make something new?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I feel like artists tend to be pretty navel-gazing, and they like to make work about making work. So that's one aspect of it.
Yeah.
But like in terms of going back to the disconnection part,
yeah,
I think it was really that idea about different stages of, going from the village to the town to the city, and then you lose something as you go along that spectrum. Like when you're in the village, you have less resources, but more of a tight community.
Right.
And then as you go up the ladder, it's this amazing technological societal achievement, but it's more alienating. It's more susceptible to breaking down, as you see the city does in the end.
Sure.
So to me, the main conflict, I guess, if that's the right word, was if M thought it was worth it to pursue what the writer was going for, which is trying to explore like ever more, areas of the world and to see what's out there, or if she should maybe retreat or come back to her home, but with a different sense of who she is, what she wants. So it's because the writer of the notebooks starts off being interested in observation and introspection, and then as she sees more of the world, she wants to go out and see like what it has to offer, even if it's like this desolate world. She's like, oh, by the end, there's the idea that if she goes across the ocean, maybe there's something even greater there. Maybe there's always potential, like in what you don't know, right? Like you could always be better than what you have now.
Sure.
Which is why it's so alluring. And that's a question I have. Like, should I stay where I am, or should I try and expand my horizons, or will that just screw up what I've already built up in my life and being near the people?
When it comes to art and writing and knowledge, though, I mean, it strikes me that the acquisition of knowledge for its own purpose is of value to society, because it teaches us more about the world, right? And M really thought what the author was doing was important at the beginning of the story, and at the end it felt like she kind of walked away from that. Was that like where did that come in the story? Was that built into it, or was that something that you decided when M had to make that decision? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that was pretty firmly like decided. I decided that at the beginning when I was writing that M wasn't going to. She was going to return, basically. That's what I decided at the beginning. Because I feel like after everything she saw on her journey, she needed to kind of take a moment and reflect on where she should go after, like if she
Right.
should follow what the writer was doing or if she should stay in her village.
Yeah.
Um,
But at the
to
end of
me,
the day,
that's really,
at the end of the day, she's doing it in both places. She's doing the same thing in both places, right? In
Mhm.
terms of preserving knowledge, of reading things, of trying to fit pieces together, to copy books that are falling apart. All of
Mhm.
those were implicit in what the writer was asking her to do, but the writer just went, "You also have to go out into the world."
Mhm. Right. Um, yeah, they are related. I mean, in my mind, it's like what the writer was interested in was the sense of like expanding your horizons.
Mhm.
And no matter how much you introspect, you could always be missing something else, right? Like she's very concerned.
Mhm.
In the notebook, there's a little passage from it that
Yeah,
M reads out, and it's about like you don't really know if what you know is true unless you go out and check it, or, like verify it against the world.
yeah,
So if you don't know what the whole world's like, if you don't know how, you know, everything, what reality is, then how are you sure that what you're thinking, what you're introspecting about is actually valid? And I think the writer kind of took that to an extreme,
very
right? She's
extreme.
like,
Yeah. Hmm.
I have to know as much as I possibly can, or else nothing I know is worthwhile. And then maybe M is more like, you know, I've had enough. Like I think I have a good enough basis to maybe work with,
Yeah.
and I can live a
To,
decent
to,
life
to,
where I
to
am.
judge to judge those truths for myself because I know enough at this point to do that.
Yeah, or at least that's what she's considering. Like I don't know if
Yeah.
by the end she actually thinks that's true. She just
Right.
has to take a moment to be like, okay, what do I want to do next, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of
Yeah.
where the book ends.
Yeah. Yeah. Very
Yeah.
much so. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I thought it was beautiful, and I felt the time, and I felt the place, and I felt the world, and I felt, I don't know, I felt it all. So I really liked it, man. I thought you did a beautiful job with this. So,
Thank you.
yeah. Um, if if, I, if there was something that I should ask you about the work that I didn't think to ask, what might that be? Is there something?
I guess one thing I was talking about, I was doing some other like interview about this book, but it was like where the inspiration was art wise.
Yeah.
And my answer was like the drawing style is more influenced by North American and European comics, but I thought the pacing was more influenced by manga, Japanese
Very
comics,
much. Yeah. Yeah.
because I really like that ability to like just not have dialogue. Or it was kind of the idea that the comic is not technically a silent comic, but it kind of feels like it could be a silent comic after you read it. Like it has that impression in your mind.
Absolutely.
So yeah, that's what I was kind of going for. Like I didn't want the words to be intrusive, you know? I wanted them to flow and kind of only appear where they needed to appear.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, we'll just have those big stretches of silence and like paying attention to just the little things in M's environment.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then in terms of the actual drawing style, I really like that squiggly, like European drawing style because I find it very unfussy. And I used to draw in a much kind of tighter, straight, like a clear line kind of way,
Yeah.
but it was just like a headache. And I guess it always comes back to whatever helps me draw more freely or make stuff in a more intuitive, kind of easier way for myself.
Yeah. No, 100%. If you were to name artistic influences on this book,
In
who would it be for the in terms of the line?
terms of line, well, when I was in my early 20s, like a lot of people, I found the work of Mobius,
Hmm.
and then it blew my mind. Like I think it blows every 20-year-old,
Yeah.
20-year-old's mind. And I think that his sense of composition definitely has stuck with me
Hmm.
through the years. Just like usually small to medium sized figure, and then you let the landscape behind them be very like expansive and have lots of room in it.
Yeah.
So I had that. I think that's always kind of in my mind. And I really like Bluch, the French
Yeah.
cartoonist.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been really getting into his stuff. Well, for the past few years, I guess. But I started doing some dry brush work in Adherent in some of the sections, and then that was kind of inspired by his work because he uses this really beautiful brush technique.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think those are pretty prominent influences.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah.
I see that very much. Yeah. Cool. All right. Let's start to wrap it up. I always end with this kind of the same two last questions. The first one being, is there something else you want to plug? Are you working on your next book now? Do you know what's coming next? Can you talk about it? If you can't, maybe you can't.
So I am working on another book, but I'm trying to get government funding for it again.
Okay.
So I've been rejected a few times, so I'm still trying to get that grant. Until then, it's like not much of anything. So I can't really. There's not much to say about that.
Mm-hmm.
But one interesting project is I guess a company or an organization in Canada approached me to make a version of Adherent for the blind and the for blind readers and like hearing impaired readers.
Uh-huh.
So it's sort of like me writing a script that can then be turned into an audiobook or braille. And it's this weird, interesting task for me to try and write the comic in prose, but in a way that conveys the sense, like the feeling of reading a comic.
Yeah.
So
how do you do that with all the silent parts?
It gets very descriptive, lots of synonyms, lots of.
I see. Okay.
They have a style guide that
Uh-huh.
you actually, yeah, a lot of people have done it already, like Joe Allman and there's been a lot of conundrum artists too who have done this project. But I just find it fascinating. Like I never knew it existed, and it's such a strange way to approach this thing I thought I was done with, and suddenly I have to like pick over it and transform it into a particular style of prose.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, especially because it's such if you'll allow me, it's such an art forward piece of work.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like to me, your rendering is almost the point in a way.
All right. Yeah, it's really difficult, as you can imagine. I guess it's like trying to get across the tone as much as I can.
Sure.
And the sense of, I guess, silence.
Yeah.
It's hard to get across.
For people who are hearing impaired, silence is right. Like you know what I mean? That's like that sounds kind of crazy. Not crazy, but
yeah,
you know what I mean. So that's very difficult to do.
It is, and that's kind of why it appealed to me. Like I was like, can I do this? Is this even possible?
Yeah.
But like they gave me examples of other works, like other comics that have been turned into this format.
Yeah.
And it is kind of amazing how much you can do. Like
how far into this are you? Are you done, or are you in the middle?
No, I'm I'm only maybe 20 pages in. I don't have to finish until the end of the year.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'll be really curious to hear it when it's finished.
Yeah. No, that's really fascinating. Is it it's a private company that's doing it, so it's something they're going to be selling, or is it something that's going to be released for free?
It's through libraries.
Okay.
And they're called eBound, but I think they want to move eventually to like commercial products.
Yeah.
But yeah, for now it's only for libraries and lending.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, in like next summer or so, I'll try to remember to look for that, because that really sounds fascinating. I would love to listen to that while I have a copy of the book in front of me and sort of see how you did it.
Yeah, it'll be like a 4D or something experience. I don't know.
Love it.
Weird.
I love it. Yeah. I love it. Cool. And so then the last question is, as I said, this is a series of interviews with cartoonists. We talk to a whole lot of people. We're I think we're at over 250 at this point. I can't even remember. And so we get a lot of people who watch this series who want to make comics themselves, obviously. And one of the things that I hear a lot from people is well, I don't know how to start, or I don't know what to do, or I'm not sure of my ability, or is my technique correct? Like just doubts, full of doubts. So if you were asked to help someone cut through their doubts, like what would be a piece of advice that you would give an aspiring cartoonist? And it can really be anything. It can be a physical craft thing. It can be sort of a psychological thing. It can be an emotional thing. But what would be your piece of advice to an aspiring cartoonist?
Yeah, I've gotten this question actually at like conventions before, and I can sympathize because before I started making comics, I had that feeling of like, who am I to make a comic? Who am I to write anything really, right? So my advice would just be to put down, kind of like I said earlier, put down every stupid idea you have into a notebook or onto a file in your computer, and then maybe put a check mark next to the ones that you think maybe have some potential, and occasionally go through it and just look back and see like, okay, that's garbage. Oh no, that's actually kind of interesting. And I found it really nice because you take all the pressure off because you kind of expect it to just be like brain vomit, right? But you kind of surprise yourself sometimes because you go like, okay, I actually have some nice ideas here and there that can be sculpted into something bigger. So that takes the pressure off. That's what I'd say for stories. And as for actual like the drawing of the comics, I'd say a lot of the time like people who think they can't draw can actually draw more interesting stuff than like some professional cartoonists. Like it still has that kind of that, I don't know, innocence maybe isn't the right word, but they're still fresh. They still don't know exactly how to do every little, how to draw a foot exactly right and everything. And that seems terrible, but I think it works out a lot of the time, especially if you're doing slightly more alternative comics. Like you shouldn't try to suppress that. I think it's really nice. It lends a certain feeling to the comic.
Yeah, very good. I love those answers, man. I love those answers. Cool. Well, I can't wait to see what you have coming up next. As I said, I loved this book. I thought it was just a beautiful piece of work. Very thoughtful, very smart, and you're young. You look like you've got many, many years of making more comics than you.
We've got the Toronto wildfire smoke. I don't know.
Well, that's true. Yeah. Well, but again, then, you can't really go outside and do anything. So you may as well sit home, draw comics, right?
That's true. Yeah. They'll all be about wastelands and big cities.
Yeah. Oh, well. All right. Stick around for a minute. Let me do a little house cleaning, close up the show, and then I will come back to you, my friend. Ben, put me on a 1 if you would. Hi. You sitting there at home. Maybe you're sitting at home and not able to leave your house because the Canadian wilderness is on fire and you can't breathe and you need to stay inside and you're looking for something to read. If that's the case, I thoroughly recommend Adherent. I think this was, I've said it now several times that how beautiful and smart and wonderful, and I think I used the word ethereal multiple times. It's really good. That's all I'm saying. You can buy a copy from us. There should be a thing somewhere on this video. There's that Shopify thing there, but there should be a link directly to go and buy a copy of the book. If you were to buy a copy from us, you would also get this really, really nice signed book plate by Chris that was done just for the club in our store. And it's a little bonus for you. It costs no extra money. So do it because it's a great book. That's what I'm trying to tell you. It's a really good book and you should have it as part of your comics library. I want to make a couple thank yous. I want to thank Jordan, my producer, for doing all the backstage stuff that nobody sees, except me, and the artist sees it too. But we couldn't run a show without all the backstage stuff, making credits and doing things, and that's great. So thank you, Jordan Willix, for doing that. I want to thank Ben for running the show here, doing the cameras and blah 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 blah, putting up the chyrons. So thank you, Ben. I want to thank my staff at the store. I want to thank Zoe, Kat, and Katie for running the store, for making me look good, for meaning that I can sit here and interview cartoonists and talk to them about making art, which is kind of the greatest thing in the world, and I couldn't do it without them. So thank you all. I want to thank all of you readers at home and all the people who are watching this. You can always click to the subscribe thing, the bell in that corner, I think. So do it. And if you're listening to this at podcast, you can subscribe as well, and you should do that as well, because that's how we do these things. And join the club if you can, because you joining the club lets us talk to cartoonists, lets us bring work to people who would not have otherwise encountered it. Conundrum is a great publisher, but they're a very small publisher, and the number of copies that we bought for the club could well have been 5% or more of the print run of this book, and that's a good thing that we're getting it out to people, so they get a chance to see it. And then finally, I want to thank cartoonists, because without cartoonists, we wouldn't have anything to talk to, and I would certainly not be owning a comic book store if there weren't cartoonists. So thank you, cartoonists, and especially thank Chris Kim right here for being you cartoonists. That I really appreciate you, and I really appreciate the time that you took speaking with us today.
Thank you, Brian. Yeah, it's really nice.
Yeah, very good. Our next two books, I didn't bring copies with me, but our next adult club book, we're doing Family Style with Tien Pham, talking about coming here as a Vietnamese immigrant when he was a child, and how all of his memories are around food. And it's a really wonderful book. Smart, you're gonna love it. Our kids club next month is The Balk Ness Monster, which is just a funny book, and I'm talking to the artists and the writer there. Those are both next month on 2 Sundays. I think it's the last 2 Sundays of the month. So come back in a little while and we will do this again. Until then, thank you very much, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for watching this episode of the Graphic Novel of the Month Club. If you enjoyed what you were watching, please subscribe and hit that bell up in the top corner. If you enjoyed the books that we're talking about and the creators that we're talking to, every month we pick a brand new book. The staff votes on it. It's a program that helps keep our store alive, and we'd love to have you as a member. You'll get a new book every month. Just follow that URL at the bottom of the screen.